Okay, so now we are going to talk about quotations. So obviously your paper has to be a nice mix between examples that you're using in your own words, that you're paraphrasing, and then quotations. So the first thing I always like to talk about is the concept of plagiarism. So taking someone else's words, ideas, or other intellectual property and passing it off as your own, which I'm sure you guys know already. So when you're using quotes from a source, always write down page numbers, titles, authors for later reference. In this case, you're obviously only using the two summer reading novels. As we go through, I'm going to be asking you to kind of pull from other pieces to incorporate other scholarly evidence. So that'll be something we touch upon later again, but always make sure when you're pulling things right out of both books, no matter what you're writing about, always write down the page numbers. So if you're paraphrasing from works we read in class, there's no citation needed. If you're paraphrasing, not if you're quoting directly, if you're paraphrasing. If you're taking people's ideas that have nothing to do with the books that we're reading, that's something different. We'll talk about that in class a little bit more, and I'll give you an example. Again, so if you're paraphrasing ideas from an outside source, citations are needed, especially if I've never read the source. Since I'm reading the same books you are, if you're paraphrasing, you don't need to cite. You only need to cite if you're actually quoting something directly. So quoting. Only put quotes around details you take directly word for word from a work. And you cite by putting last name and page number. So you'll put the quote in quotation marks, and then afterwards the author's last name, like Weasel, and then the page number 13. You close the parentheses, you always put a period. You don't put a period at the end of the sentence, you put a period at the end of the citation. All right, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too. Quotes are used to support your arguments, so this means they are not used to further support plot. All right, so you give me your idea of plot, and then you support it with information. Your quotes are the analysis that supports what you're trying to say. Only use what you need. All right? Many students quote large sections of fluff when they only need a small point. If you're realizing that the quotes that you're using are like 10 lines long, most likely it's way too long, and you can condense it into something more specific and only take out what you really need. Work on incorporating quotes into your own sentences to make things flow. All right, so we're going to use that, in class. We'll practice that, but here's an example. And I use this from Anthem. I teach this with my sophomores. Fear is used to control citizens when they are told men who go to the uncharted forest, and this is where the quote actually starts, word for word from the book. Perish from hunger and from the claws of the wild beast which roam the forest. End quotes. And then you have your parentheses that have the author's last name, Rand, page number 48. You close it, and then you have the period. And lastly, paraphrasing. Remember, changing one word does not make something a paraphrase. So if you take out the word and in a quote and everything else is still word for word, that doesn't change things. You just throw the word and back in there and throw quotation marks around it. Alright, so you have to make sure that you know the difference between when you're paraphrasing and putting things in your own words, or when you're just directly taking something straight out of the book.